All right, it's Sunday morning and we are recording live. This week I don't have Paul with me, as you can see, but instead I have James Byrne, the General Manager at Ecom Nation, who's joining me this morning for our conversation about what's happening in e-commerce this week. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Mal. Yeah, good to be here. I've watched a few of these, and nice to be sitting across from you again.
Not that we don't see each other enough during the week.
Yeah, no, it's on pretty much every day, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it is going to be a very big week, so it's glad to kick off the week like this because this is Online Retailer Week, possibly one of the biggest weeks in the Australian e-commerce calendar, where most of the industry descends onto Sydney at the ICC for 2 days of conferencing, as well as the multitude of events outside of that. James, will you be there this year?
I will be there this year. It'll be my second year. I went last year, and I was kind of blown away by the scale of it. I'd not been to a digital or an e-commerce conference of that scale before. So, yeah, now that I know a bit more of what to expect, yeah, pretty excited actually.
Yeah, it's going to be a great event. So there's going to be a lot of if you're ticketed, there's going to be a lot of things you can attend with some fantastic speakers, many from South Australia, I'm proud to say. But if you're not, there's going to be the great expo side as well, which is free to attend for retailers, I believe. And also, if you are there, Paul and I will be hosting the Nora podcast booth for 2 days, right in the middle of the exhibition hall. So for 2 days, you'll be able to come and see some really amazing talks. So we're going to be hosting a bunch of interviews back to back, pretty much from 10 to 4 every day, with the likes of Sam Morton from SKDA, Jake and TK from G'd Up, Neg from Oz Fashion Labels, the Designer X crew, and many, many more. So it's going to be a fantastic event, brought to you by Invenco this year. So great to have a naming rights sponsor for the Nora Podcast Theatre, which is going to be a lot of fun. But outside of that as well, we are partnering with Seco to host some drinks before the Aureas.
Yeah, this was sort of a cool opportunity that came up to kind of partner with to someone. We did some drinks last year. They were pretty informal, but they were really nice. It was a nice kind of roll into the Aureas event that came into afterwards. So to be partnering with someone this year is really great. And obviously there'll be reps from Ecom Nation and reps from Seco there as well, and you can talk to them about all your global logistics needs and all that kind of stuff, and obviously us for about e-commerce stuff as well. So yeah, no, I'm pretty excited about that as well.
Yeah, and more just to like connect with the industry as well. And that's what I love the most about these events, the opportunity to really build relationships. I'm a big relationships guy. So the opportunity to go to these events, go to these drinks, go to these dinners and really form some really strong bonds with other people in the industry can lead to some amazing partnerships and collaborations. So if you are going to be an online retailer and you are at a loose end before Aureas, please do reach out to James or I, or just leave a comment in the leave a comment in the comments, I should say, and it will be great to have you there. And we'll send through the details. It's all free to attend for the pre-drinks, so please let us know. We would love to see you there, and that's happening at 4:30 to 6:30 at Planner.
Hmm.
So, James, it has been a pretty big week in e-commerce, as most weeks are. But this week, a couple of announcements really caught my eye. The first one being Amazon Prime, which was on Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, Paul and I talk about Amazon a lot and our love for Amazon. That while Amazon is a retailer's worst nightmare, they are a consumer's wet dream. They do so many things that are fantastic for the consumer, from their speed of delivery, from their pricing, from their just general selection of products which they have. And Tuesday and Wednesday was Amazon Prime, which is their major sales event for the year. Right up there. That's effectively their Black Friday. So on Prime Day, over 2 days globally, the stats out of the US are that they sold $12.7 billion worth of goods in those 2 days, which was $2.5 billion up on the year before. That's quite remarkable to see that sort of growth. What's your take on that in terms of like what that says for retail? Does retail still have a pulse, or do you feel that this is just a blip?
No, I think it was really interesting because I think a lot of people in the lead up to Prime Day were kind of, Amazon were always going to be really bullish about it, but I know that there are other commentators who are kind of maybe a little bit apprehensive about how it would go, given sort of global economic trends, particularly in Australia as well, quite a flat market across the board. But no, it did really well. I think the difference is, and maybe the interesting part is that it did well in parts that maybe weren't expected to do well. there wasn't a huge rush on the big electronics, the big sort of ticket items. It was more, I think I saw, pet food was up an incredible amount. It was household staples. It was things where people were waiting for a discount they know would be there for the things they need for their household anyway, and either buying in bulk or just buying their normal sort of their daily shop, but waiting for that Prime Day to get it done.
Interesting, because I did buy some consumer electronics. So I bought some new studio lights. I've got some other stuff for the studio, which are arriving next week. But my big ticket item I bought was a new robot vacuum cleaner, which was about 40% off,
Yeah, right.
which I was pretty happy with. And they had some really, really impressive deals on there. So even though end of financial year sale was like, not even 2 weeks prior to that, and I was looking at things there, I didn't purchase at that point. I actually waited. I wasn't sure why I waited. And then Prime came along and I started looking for those products again, and they were actually priced cheaper. But I think anyway, I am hearing a lot of reports from a lot of people in the industry, particularly a lot of the manufacturers, who were popping champagne on the on WhatsApp with their clients, just with how successful Prime Day was for them, and seeing those amazing numbers there. So look, well done to Amazon. It's kind of going to show what we've been saying, that Amazon is slowly creeping up there. So for Australian retailers, especially, really thinking about how Amazon plays into your strategy, whether it is part of your strategy or something you need to defend against.
I got a question for you, like just as a thought, right? And Amazon having the model that it has, right, for Amazon Prime, are you surprised that there aren't other people who are in a similar kind of space doing the same thing? I know Walmart and Target in the US are doing an Amazon Prime-like sort of product. Do you expect other big retailers to do the same thing?
In Australia, I think it's highly unlikely, just because we don't have the reach and scale. The benefit of being able to do something like that in America is the fact that it's a giant country and everyone is fairly closely connected. There's a lot of cities and towns nearby. They have a lot better infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, than we do. The number of trucks which are on the road in America like completely dwarf ours. Even when you consider population size differences. We don't quite have that because we are very geographically spread out. So it's hard for us to build that sort of network, that sort of infrastructure. So I don't see that happening with any of our big, quote unquote, big retailers. And to be honest, we don't have too many, quote unquote, big retailers besides Woolworths and Coles.
Yeah.
Really outside of that, we're kind of pressed. Like the other ones, like David Jones and Myer, yes, they are doing some interesting things, but I wouldn't really see any of them being able to compete with Amazon at that sort of scale.
Yeah, no, fair enough. You just see a winning model and wonder how you're going to do it. That's all.
Now, something else which came up was Shopify recently announced Shopify's Sidekick as well. So Toby, the CEO and one of the co-founders of Shopify, announced via a video earlier this week the impending launch of Sidekick, which is their AI assistant for Shopify entrepreneurs. Do you think that's going to be able to put people like us out of the business?
No, I think what he showed in that demo, was impressive, right? The kind of things it can see and the kind of things it can do. If that demo is reflective of what it does, I think what it's going to do is it's going to help. I think it's going to do what he said it's going to do. It's going to help those kind of solo entrepreneurs, those people who need a bit of assistance or they need that kind of little bit of insight. I think where agencies still have their place is that tool, like all AI tools, it's got a limited data model and it's going to generate a response based on that input, right? You still need to know what questions to ask. And I think as businesses become larger and more complex, that nuanced understanding of e-commerce, of the market, of industry, of trends, is going to lead to the need for better questions. So that's where agencies can still, I think, play a role. I think the other thing is that, and again, we have not seen a finished product, so it's hard to know, right? It looks like it opens the door to a whole bunch of new issues that people need to think about with the Sidekick. I don't know if you've looked too much into some of the commentary around that as well, but there's some sort of interesting questions being asked around Sidekick.
Interesting. Like what?
Like access control. It was a big one. Who gets access to Sidekick? Is it like, it looks like it's going to be free, but am I as a merchant going to be able to determine who in my business can use it? because if I've set access controls to various parts of my Shopify store, is someone going to be able to use Sidekick to circumvent those access controls and change config of my store just by asking a question? That's a potentially big problem, right? Also, I think there's some questions around data availability. What data can Sidekick actually access and see? And also, what is it going to share? If I'm sharing the Shopify platform with my competitors, is it going to be possible for me to go, hey, Sidekick, what's the conversion rate on my top 3 competitors' stores? Would it give me that information? And if it does, should it have given me that information? I think there's some interesting questions around, like, I guess, how is it going to work, and where's the data going to come from?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I was thinking about it more from the point of view of like, hey, I'm thinking of doing something. Like, what sort of promo should I run this weekend to generate an X% uplift in revenue? Or this month I'm XYZ below my target. How can I make that up? What suggestions do you have? In that regard, that was more what I was thinking. For that, I think if it can answer those questions really well, and I don't know how it's going to be able to do that. A lot of it is just basically looking at projected uplifts on what a promo could do. I would hope that it's got that smarts behind it by being able to look at previous data, looked at what promos you've run previously to be able to recommend you, hey boss, we should be doing this type of promo. And other things like that where, it requires a little bit more external influence. There's a lot more data sources it needs to consider. Maybe you might struggle with that. And that's where, people like me would still have a role and can be able to continue to provide that strategic advice.
Absolutely. Because I think the other part of that is that, that's a great example, right? Hey, should I run a sale this weekend, based on trend data or whatever else, right? Whatever inputs you want to anticipate, Sidekick, should I do this? If you ask an agency a question and they say yes, and then it doesn't work, well, you can fire the agency, or you can, there's someone for whom you can kind of follow up and go, why didn't this work? If it's an AI tool, hey, Sidekick, should I do this? Yeah, you should, and then it doesn't work. Who's responsible for that advice?
Where does the liability lie? Yeah. Absolutely. And that's a great point. And I think there's some recent rulings in the US around that as well, which I read one recently. I didn't read the full article, so I'm going to get back to you on that. Just in terms of like when you do get that piece of advice from an AI, like who's actually liable? Is it OpenAI who's programmed it and trained it in a certain way, or is it you for prompting it? And it actually giving you that answer. So it kind of goes back to the ongoing issues with big tech in the US about who is actually liable, who's actually responsible for preventing hate speech, for preventing things, legal and ethical issues which arise on social media and AI. Who actually bears liability for that?
Here's another one for you as well. You mentioned OpenAI, right? Do we have any idea how up to date this information is? We know ChatGPT's data sort of ends at about 2021, right? At least in some of the versions of it. How up to date will Sidekick's data be when it's making these insights and providing this advice to you? I don't think we've got any read on that yet, right? So, there's potentially some questions there. And then the other thing that I was thinking about, and I saw some commentary about, is what does this do to the app ecosystem within Shopify? A huge part of why we love Shopify and why we recommend it for our clients is this app ecosystem, which can allow you to do all this stuff. If you've got Sidekick there that you can kind of ask to do a bunch of this stuff, what happens to all of our app developers and all of our sort of app partners who provide a lot of additional and alternative viewpoints to the Shopify ecosystem? If a Sidekick can just do it, can they coexist? I don't know. It's a high
very interesting. Well, I also wonder whether that just ends up meaning that the app marketplace gets more squeezed because only a few people will win. When you ask Sidekick to help you to do something, it will just recommend you the same apps over and over again. So everyone is getting more of just the same recommendations. Like let's say you like reviews, and it just recommends Yotpo, which is great for our partner Yotpo. But what does it mean for other competitors who come into that market or other reviews platforms which come up? It doesn't mean that only a few win. Very interesting, James. I think that's something we'll need to watch. I think very little is known about Sidekick so far besides one video, and it's all speculation at this point. But no matter what, I believe it is going to be very disruptive for Shopify entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, moving on to our big story for the week, which is about the Great Resignation. So, New York Times about a week or two ago came up with a story which reported that the Great Resignation, as far as the US was concerned, is over. Obviously, over the last few years through COVID, there's been a lot of people who were moving jobs very, very easily and very, very freely. Matter of
Mm.
fact, we are currently hiring at the moment for a number of roles, and looking through some of the resumes, you see a lot of people who have only really been in roles for about 10 months or so before moving on to the next one. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting as well. Whereas before, if you go back 5, 6 years ago, if you looked at someone who'd only been in a role for less than a year, you'd probably ask some questions. Now it's becoming more and more common. But what the New York Times is saying is that that has definitely slowed down, and people are leaving roles less and less over the last few months. So, James, I'm not sure if you're still there. It looks like you cut off.
No, I'm here. I'm here, definitely.
You're still here? Okay. For those who aren't familiar, James lives in the Adelaide Hills, so his internet
My
can
internet's
sometimes be a little
fine.
bit flaky.
My internet's fine.
Yeah. Well, I've lost video on James, but that's okay.
Oh, okay.
So, James, with all this straight resignation, like what do you think it means for e-commerce?
I think it's really interesting, right? Because I mean, you look at some of the data that we were having a look at beforehand, and you have a look at some of the other commentary, and Australia is obviously very different to the US. We didn't have a great resignation. They were calling it more of a quiet quitting sort of movement, or a great contemplation, is what I saw in a couple of places. I think whether or not it sort of happens or happened in Australia in the same way, what is really important for us to understand is why. What was the why were people happy to jump up and go and move jobs? Yes, there was a lot of shift around COVID and those kinds of things, but a lot of the data that we're seeing, and a lot of the things that I've been reading, is it's people were still only moving jobs if they wanted to move jobs. They just, that threshold to going, oh, I've had enough, I'm going to move on, was what lowered. And what sets that threshold for a lot of people was about being valued. It was about, and then as work from home and additional sort of measures of flexibility were built in, that element became more and more prominent as well. And I think that's a really interesting thing to understand. And obviously, we spend a lot of time talking with our team and understanding what they need and what they want. And flexibility is a big part of the things that we hear back. And working from home or having an office available to them, that kind of stuff. We have to be really reactive to that, and really and proactive in that space as well, making sure that we're suiting what our team needs in order to do their best job, and being really aware of that. I think probably what's I'm most interested now is what's going to happen next. If we assume that we're following the US, and that whether or not these same exact effects we're seeing, the timing is more that, okay, we're also coming out of COVID, and we can see all the kind of the employment stats changing the way they are. You've seen some media commentators in the last few weeks come out and say work from home's rubbish, everyone should get back to their offices. And I think that's going to be a really interesting shift, because I don't think people want to do that. I mean, certainly our team doesn't. We have office, we use the offices that we have, but there's no expectation around like you have to be in this chair for 9 to 5 every single day. We have a lot of flexibility in the way that we work, and it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see what how this continues to evolve in the space, and whether or not the flexible workplace is one that will win out over those ones that require you to sit in a chair.
That's interesting, because like how I look at it was that Australia, well, e-commerce as a sector though was massively impacted by the Great Resignation, and a lot of that was because of the huge demand for people with e-commerce experience. What I saw over the last few years from 2019, well, sorry, 2020 to 2022, was a lot of people very quickly moving up from junior coordinator roles to like manager or senior type roles. A lot of that was just driven by the flat out demand for people with experience, with digital experience, with e-commerce experience. So so people had the upper hand. So the worker had the upper hand because there was such demand for people with that talent, because the demand was there for the talent, and because the demand was there for those particular products. So you had a lot of people, a lot of businesses moving online, their online revenue was skyrocketing, and they needed to hire to support that. What I see happening now, though, is that as the market has cooled, as we now enter, this recession in anything but name, lowering consumer confidence, higher interest rates, lower consumer demand, all those factors are now playing to the fact that, now revenues are starting to cool. Revenues are starting to cool. People are realized that they actually overhired through that period. They suddenly went from like, let's say, a wage bill of like, $40,000 a month to like $60,000 a month. But then now the revenues have actually reverted back to more around what it was close to around the 40, 50, what it was when they were paying $40,000, $50,000 a month. So they overhired for growth, which either has stopped or was never really there in the first place. Yeah. And I see that happening in a lot of businesses. And now they're in a bit of a position of like, we've overhired, and not only have we overhired, but we also drove up salaries quite a lot. So if you look at e-commerce as a sector, wage growth, while overall, as a country, our wage growth has been quite low. I think as a sector, wage growth has been incredibly high.
Yeah.
And you could see salaries who someone would previously, prior to the pandemic, would have been on 110, 120, was then demanding 160, 180 through the pandemic. And now when that growth is gone, I think business owners are starting to look at that number now and going like, wow, like we've given someone a salary for something which is no longer there. Our business has actually gone backwards. So what do we do now with that? As a result, I think with lowering salaries now, I feel that salaries are kind of like settling back down from some of the conversation I've been having and what I've been seeing out in the market. While that's been settling back down, you also now have these great performers, people who are legitimately great talent, getting paid really great salaries, but possibly higher than what the market actually is like now. So a lot of these people are now thinking like, I can't take the risk of leaving, because if I leave, what am I going to be leaving to? I can't leave to get the same level, like the same salary. So I'm going to need to leave to go on a lower salary. So now with all those factors combining, the desire to move isn't there. While businesses may be thinking we need to reduce our wage bill, that will come. And unfortunately, there are going to be, and there have already been some consequences of that, with a lot of fairly well-known retrenchments which have happened recently in the industry. All this stuff is going to happen. So I feel that there's going to be less of a desire to move, particularly if you're trying to hold on to what you've gained through that period. But I think people are now going to be looking for more secure situations as well, but also because there's also fewer jobs, out there as well. People are hiring less. They're actually looking to downsize their teams in a lot of cases, which means fewer jobs. We've actually brought in a lot more people into this sector. You're probably going to see less movement.
I think so too. And I think like that's very much, I guess, the employer position. And I think that's completely reasonable. And there's a lot of concerns there as well. I think the other side of that is from the employee's perspective, it was a great opportunity. And obviously, we know e-commerce and sort of online retail is a great democratizer of that retail environment, right? You go with a storefront, you could be just a single person running quite a large store, right? But with that sort of tailing off of e-commerce from those people kind of doing those huge numbers that we saw not so long ago, how many of those people who like took that opportunity to go, I'm going to go do my own thing, I'm going to go live my passion, I'm going to go start this thing, and now finding themselves underemployed with no market to support them going back into a full-time employment now that their own store is failing or their own store is having its troubles. I think there's that's the other side of things that I think would be really interesting. And I don't know how we tease the data out for that as well. I'm assuming that someone can track that sort of thing.
Yeah, people much smarter and better paid than us, James.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. James, I think that's all we've got time for. Mate, really appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday morning to chat with me. Really looking forward to spending the week with you at Online Retailer, plus with anyone else who is going to be there. Remember, please reach out, give us a shout. We've got a few events going on, a few drinks on both the Wednesday and Thursday night. If you're at a loose end, some fantastic events, and really looking forward to reconnecting with a lot of the industry.
Absolutely.